Hi Reddit, it's me again. I had a moment last night where I realized I probably peaked too early with the test calls. Most of my creepy stories are a mixture of weird, funny, and a little bit scary, unlike the test calls, which just freak out and annoy me, to be honest. This call from a few months ago sticks in my mind, though, and I think it probably always will. We get our fair share of hoax calls, especially during the school holidays. Kids get bored, they find a payphone or steal their mom's mobile and dial the first number that comes to mind. 999. They're scared of the police, and they know that fire can hang up on them, so they ask for an ambulance. We don't assume that every child is a hoax caller. It's usually quite easy to tell. There will be a group of them, they'll be giggling. They'll probably give their friend's address, so they'll struggle to remember the postcode. And then they might say something like, "I'm bleeding from my vagina!" That usually comes from the boys, and hang up, pleased with themselves. We might call back, try to process a call with them to catch them out, or just remind them that this is an emergency service and they could be stopping us from helping someone in danger. This one was different. The voice was very young, 3, maybe 4, and she recited her address perfectly. I listened to the call recording again and again after the event to see if I missed something. I can pretty much recite it word for word by now. What is the address of the emergency?
Can you send Mommy an ambulance, please?
I wasn't expecting this polite little voice to come through my headset. It took me by surprise. I've heard the recordings where little kids call an ambulance because their mom or dad has fallen or had a fit, but they're rare. I've never had one myself. I found the page in my training notebook on dealing with child callers. Change the question so they understand, reassure them constantly, stay on the line. Not too difficult. Where do you live, sweetheart? She reeled off an address, a telephone number, and told me that she thought her mom was conscious and breathing. I was impressed. This girl knew her stuff. Presumably, her nursery had an emergency services day. Sometimes we send our public health teams into the community to educate kids on how to make 999 calls. Can Mommy come to the phone? I asked, wondering if some harassed-sounding woman was going to take the line and apologize for her daughter wanting to put her newfound 999 knowledge into practice.
No, she's tied up.
Well, shit. I called James over. He was the call handler supervisor that day, and he plugged in to listen. I immediately typed "police required, child caller, mom tied up" in the text box. The dispatcher looked over to see if I was joking, but my expression must have told him that I wasn't. I heard them call through to police control and pass over the details. "What's your name?" I asked.
Sophie.
"Okay, Sophie. My name is Holly. I'm gonna help you help your mommy, okay?" I said, trying to recall everything about my training on child callers. This wasn't going to be as simple as taking the details and staying on the phone.
Please help her.
"Sophie, where are you now?" I asked. My heart was racing.
In the cupboard. It is hot and there's lots of smoke.
James put a hand on my back to reassure me that I was doing well, but for me, This was scarier than any test call or any other call that I'd taken. This is the sort of call that gets you dragged into coroner's court, and no one wants to go to coroner's court. I added "fire required, smoke mentioned" into the notes and heard the dispatcher relay the information to fire control. I felt sick. This poor little girl. I took a few more details, the girl's full name, her mom's name, to pass on to the police, and then Sophie started to panic. "Okay, Sophie, stay where you are. Don't open the door, sweetheart. You're being very brave. You've done the right thing calling this number. I'm gonna stay on the phone with you until the ambulance arrives."
Daddy's going to hurt me.
The way she said those words, it's going to stay with me for the rest of my life. I've never heard anyone, let alone such a young child, sound so scared and resigned in equal measure.
If he finds out I called you, he's going to hurt me.
We won't tell him, Sophie. It's really important that you stay on the line with me. You're such a brave, clever girl. Don't hang up, okay? There was a long silence at this point, and I had this sick feeling in the pit of my stomach. After what felt like an eternity, her voice came through again, hoarse, raspy, and scared.
"It's so hot."
The line went dead. Every time I tried to call back, it cut off. I'm a pretty strong person. I've dealt with a lot at work, but I'm not even kidding. I burst into tears. I managed to finish writing my notes, and then all the energy left my body. I'd been running on pure adrenaline and panic, and once it was done, I sat back in my chair and sobbed. James had to pretty much manhandle me out of control and into the quiet room where he sat me down and told me I did everything right. They'd get to the house and do their best. He said there was no obligation to go back on the phones that day. They're a good employer. And they understand that we take some really shitty calls sometimes, and he'd get an update as soon as he could. I sat in the quiet room for a bit, watching something on TV, international athletics or something like that. It's weird how it sticks in your mind. And James came back in. There was a weird look on his face, and my heart sank. Are they all dead?" I asked quietly. James took a deep breath and sat down opposite me. "Holly, there wasn't anyone there," he said. My face must have been a picture, because he didn't waste any time explaining. "There's a family living there, but they're all fine. No little kids living in the house except a baby who isn't old enough to talk yet. They've lived there for nearly 10 years since the house was built. Police searched the area in case the kid gave the wrong address, but there's no sign. The mobile number she gave traces to a middle-aged man in the Outer Hebrides." "Why would the call come through us?" I asked. "We aren't even in Scotland. We're hundreds of miles from the Hebrides. A call from that number should have gone through Scottish Ambulance." James shrugged. We try not to question the technical stuff too much. "It doesn't sound like he made the call anyway," he shrugged. Vodafone had no record of a 999 coming from his number. I tear looking into it, but it's probably going to be one of those things we won't figure out. Like the test calls, but less dangerous. "Still sick," I said, feeling nauseous. How could anyone think that was a funny prank? I can deal with teenage boys telling me about their bleeding vaginas, but this was a step too far. It was a little girl's voice, not an adult pretending to be a child, an actual child. I spent most of the day in the quiet room, with the well-being team popping their head around the door every now and then to make sure I wasn't suicidal, and then took a few calls before the end of my shift. It's good to take at least one call before you finish, especially after a rough day. Sometimes it's easy to feel like you could walk out and never go back. Taking that one last call reminds you that this job isn't always so shitty. A couple weeks later, I'd pretty much put the call out of my mind. Nothing new came to light about it. IT drew a blank, and so did the police when they were investigating on their end. There's a weird kind of curiosity with call handlers, though. We'll often be found scouring local obituaries, trying to see if the cardiac arrests we'd taken end up in there. Sometimes we'll find out if a patient survived or was ROLE'd on scene. Recognition of life extinct. Essentially, the paramedics get there and decide there's nothing they can do. The obituaries are our best bet. I did a search for the names of the girl and her mom, just out of sheer morbid curiosity. They lived at that address. The little girl had given me the right address, but she was 10 years too late. Shit. I don't know how to explain it. There is no explanation. And I'm freaking myself out thinking about it now. That house was built almost 10 years ago, after the previous house burnt down. A man tied up his wife, slit her throat, and let her bleed out, and then he set the house on fire, killing himself and their 4-year-old daughter. As a rule, 999 call handlers don't do superstition, except the test calls, obviously, and spirituality. There's no afterlife, there are no ghosts, there's no residual energy when someone dies. Your heart stops, it can't be started, you're worm food. I have no idea how that call came from a phone in the Outer Hebrides that never made a 999 call. I have no idea how we sent 10 resources across different emergency services to a house with no emergency. I have no idea how any of it happened. I was never a superstitious person. I sure as hell am now. The weird thing is, I was able to laugh it off at work. I told myself it was a sicko who used some kind of phone number proxy. I don't even know if that's even a thing, but it makes me feel better to carry out a grim prank involving the details of a little girl who died 10 years ago. Maybe they had a daughter or a niece that they coached to say all those things and had a good laugh at the panic they caused me and the waste of resources. It happens. Maybe I dreamed the whole thing. I've woken up after a run of night shifts shouting, "Ambulance service, what's the address of the emergency?" and panicking when no one answers. Work seeps into life. It's an inescapable fact of the work we do. Writing out all of this made me cry. I tell the story to the new starters as a kind of, yeah, we get sick pranks here, you get used to it. But I've never written it down in full before. Remembering the helplessness in that little girl's voice, you always wonder if you could have done more for a caller, even when all the evidence tells you that you couldn't. Anyway, I promise you'll get a fun, creepy story next time. I think I just needed to get that out. Well, that was quite something, wasn't it? I think all of us would feel at least a bit shaken receiving such a strange and impossible call. What do you think, dear listeners? Was this just a prank? A glitch in reality, or something else? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you can keep up with Holly's stories of her time on the phones. And follow me on social media linked below for updates and announcements. Be well, my darklings. Be safe and kind to one another, and don't forget, all the best things happen after midnight.